Now, I'd like to move on, as we do customarily, to think about the theoretical definition of social well-being. In that definition, the philosophical origin of this idea comes from two English philosophers in the 18th century, Jeremy Bentham and somewhat after him, John Stuart Mill. This is a quote from Bentham on this page. The greatest happiness of the greatest number is the foundation of morals and legislation, he says. This idea, this principle, that we should bring the greatest happiness to the greatest number, or the greatest good to the greatest number, has come to be called a utilitarianism. It is the idea that we do whatever is necessary to make things best for everybody overall. That's the key idea. Now, how can this be specified? One reason why this theory works well in computer science areas is because it does have a kind of mathematical um, formulation. And that is, anytime you're considering an act, what you should do is very simply add up all the happiness that will result from that act for each person. So HP1 is the happiness of person one plus the happiness of person two. And then subtract the sadness or the displeasure or the suffering from each person that will also result from that act. So that's the sadness of person one, sadness of person two. And then simply ask, is this total greater than zero? And I think going back to the case, um, if we select, if there are four people in the emergency room, and we select one person to die to save two, it would seem like there would be quite a bit of positive happiness for the two people who are chosen to live, and a significant unhappiness for the one person who was chosen to die. But especially if we're talking about just the three who were going to die anyway, it seems as though, at least mathematically, the resulting happiness gain would be greater than the sadness or displeasure loss. So you originally have a situation where the person with the ankle is sort of neutral, and three people are very depressed because they are about to die. If you choose one of those three who are very depressed and select them to sacrifice their organs for the other two, their condition, their sadness will hardly change. They thought they were going to die, and they still think they are going to die. Whereas by contrast, because of this act, the happiness of the other two who are selected and lucky enough to live, well, that obviously increases quite markedly. So just by simple calculation, almost mathematically, you can produce an ethical justification for this decision to sacrifice one to save the other two. And again, this mathematical aspect, this calculation, which exists at the heart of utilitarianism, it is one of the reasons why it works, or can be taken to work fairly well in the context of computer science and emotion AI ethics. Now, just two further points about this theory to define it. When Bentham talks about happiness and pleasure on the positive side, or unhappiness and displeasure on the negative side, he wants to ensure that we talk about everybody who is affected by an act as far into the future as possible. So this is a bit of a challenge of the theory, and it complicates quite a bit the kinds of decisions you might make. So let's go back to the case of the emergency room, and let's start with the scenario where we have the person with the ankle injury. We just leave that person out, and we are trying to choose one of the three who need organ transplants to live. We will choose one of the three to be sacrificed for the other two. If we are going to count happiness and suffering for everyone who is affected, then it seems like we would need to look beyond just those three people. We might look at the three and say, this person has two of the three have families and children, and their family depends upon them for support and so on. Whereas the last of the three might be an elderly person on whom no one depends. And let's just imagine this person has no family and few friends, right? So in this case, uh, it would seem that sacrificing that one person with no family would lead to very little additional sorrow in the world. Whereas by contrast, choosing to sacrifice one of the two who has a family, children, and who are necessary to support that family, that sacrificial choice seems like it would lead to subsequent unhappiness. The spouse would be unhappy, the children would be unhappy, and so on. So if we're just counting, again, happiness and unhappiness, and we're counting it for everybody who is affected by an act, that might give us a way to move away from the lottery decision about who should die and use the social situation of each of the three possibilities to make a decision about which one should be selected for the sacrifice. Now, whether or not the artificial intelligence in the emergency room has access to that information, that's a different question. If it does have access to that information, then it should be used. All information should be used according to this theory to judge, again, the maximum total outcome of happiness and pleasure positively or sadness negatively. So that's one fine point of the theory. And then the second fine point of the theory is that for most applications, most advocates of this theory um, lean very heavily into the idea that it is a purely collectivist theory. That is, what matters is what the total happiness is overall when everyone is taken into account. And that's the only thing that matters. So we could change or invent a kind of quick secondary thought experiment here. We could imagine the thought experiment this way. You could give one person, one single person, 10 units of happiness, or you could give 10 people zero point 0.9 units of happiness each, right? So what would happiness be in this situation? Well, it might be something very simple, like a cookie, or like dollar bills, or tickets to a concert, or some such thing. In any case, whatever those units are, it could be money, tickets, cookies, so on. You have the choice between giving 10 units of happiness to one person or zero point 0.9 units of happiness to 10 people. Now, I think for many people, the impulse would be, well, we should give it zero point 0.9 units to 10 people, kind of spread around the joy a little bit. But for most advocates of utilitarianism, partially because they lean heavily into the mathematical element, and partially because they want to see so purely the idea that we should maximize happiness across the entire society. Most would say, at least in this theoretical kind of condition, we should award 10 units of happiness to one person instead of zero point 0.9 units of happiness to 10, because the difference is we can either have 10 units of happiness or 9 units of happiness, which is zero point 0.9 times 10. So I think in this way, or what this underlines, is how truly social the theory is. What we look at is only the outcome or the consequences for everyone, and we try to maximize that number. For that reason, this theory is sometimes referred to as a consequentialist theory. This kind of ethics is sometimes referred to as consequentialism. It differs with a deontological approach, which we saw with autonomy or with dignity. We are not going to go further down that path for this more applied course, but the idea that what matters are the consequences of an act, that is really very critical to understanding this particular theory. And I think, again, this mini thought experiment, you could give one person 10 units of happiness or 10 people zero point 0.9 units of happiness. I think that underlines um, how severely the preference is for the total social outcome, as opposed to how individuals are affected by one or another decision.